Amazing, isn't it? Imagine a world where survival was a daily gamble. No hospitals, no antibiotics, no supermarkets, just you, your tribe, and a wilderness teeming with predators. Now picture an old man, toothless, hunched from arthritis, sitting by the fire, telling ancient hunting stories. You'd think he's an anomaly, a miracle in a world where everyone died young. But what if I told you he wasn't rare? What if our prehistoric ancestors, from 1.8 million to 30,000 years ago, didn't just scrape by, but lived long, meaningful lives, some reaching their 70s, 80s, or even beyond? And what if the reason we believe otherwise is all based on one misleading number? Today, we're diving into a story that rewrites human history. Forget the old image of short, brutal lives. Archaeological discoveries and modern studies have revealed a shocking truth. Prehistoric humans often lived long lives, cared for by their communities, and their longevity challenges everything we thought we knew about our species. This isn't just a story of bones and data. It's a story of what makes us human. Join me on a journey through time, from the caves of Neanderthals to the wisdom of modern hunter-gatherer tribes, as we uncover why our ancestors' lives still matter today. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so we can explore these hidden truths together. We've all heard the same story. Prehistoric humans died young, rarely making it past 30. That's the image pop culture paints. Cavemen clubbing each other, dying of disease or getting mauled by saber-toothed tigers. But that image is a myth, born from a misunderstanding of a single statistic: average life expectancy. That 30-year average might sound scientific, but it's a trap. It's just an average, and averages can lie. In ancient societies, child mortality was extremely high. Anywhere from 30% to 50% of children died before the age of 5, from malnutrition, infection, or accidents. When half a population dies young, the average drops, even if adults live much longer. Picture this. In a group of 10 people, 5 die at age 2, and 5 live to 60. The average life expectancy? 31. But those who survive childhood live full lives. This isn't guesswork, it's math. And archaeology backs it up. Skeletal remains from prehistoric sites show clear signs of old age. Teeth worn down from decades of chewing, spines curved from arthritis, bones healed from past injuries. These aren't the bones of 20-somethings. They are the remains of grandparents, elders who lived long enough to carry the weight of time in their bodies. To me, that challenges our arrogance. We like to think modern medicine invented longevity, but our ancestors defied death in a world far harsher than ours. The myth of the short life paints prehistoric humans as primitive, barely human at all. But if they lived to 70 and were cared for by their tribe, what does that say about their society, about their values, about their humanity? It wasn't just about survival, it was about connection, compassion, and community. And when we peel back the layers, we find that longevity wasn't a modern invention. It was written in our DNA all along. Archaeologists have uncovered clues that rewrite the story of prehistoric life. At Dmanisi, Georgia, a 1.8 million-year-old Homo erectus skull was found, nicknamed the Old Man of Dmanisi. He had only one tooth left. His jaw showed signs of healed sockets, meaning he had lived for years after losing the ability to chew. How? Someone must have fed him, perhaps by softening his food or even chewing it for him. And he wasn't the only one. In Shanidar Cave, Iraq, lived Shanidar I, a Neanderthal who walked the earth 45,000 years ago. He was blind in one eye, deaf in one ear, and had a crippled arm. Yet he lived into his 40s or 50s. His survival depended entirely on others, sharing food, protecting him, making space for him in their lives. Fast forward to 30,000 years ago in France. Cro-Magnon I, an early Homo sapiens, suffered from arthritis, tumors, and physical deformities, but still lived to around 50. He was buried with other elders, surrounded by tools and amulets, not discarded, but honored. And these aren't isolated cases. Across countless prehistoric sites, we find the remains of elderly individuals, and their bones tell stories of care, compassion, and survival in a brutal world. These discoveries flip the old narrative on its head. We're taught that prehistoric life was all about survival of the fittest, but these skeletons tell another story. A story of empathy, caring for the weak, the injured, the ones who could no longer hunt or fight. It required sacrifice. It meant less food, more risk, more responsibility. And yet they did it. Why? I believe it's because humans, even 1.8 million years ago, saw value beyond usefulness. They didn't just survive. They built communities where love, loyalty, and compassion stood above mere practicality. I once read a study on empathy in primates. Chimpanzees share food, but only when it benefits them. Humans? We share even when it costs us. That's what I see in these ancient bones. A flicker of humanity that made us different. And it's humbling to realize that long before writing, cities, or science, our ancestors practiced kindness in ways we still struggle to match today. This is the story of Nara, a prehistoric girl who became independent. Nara left the shelter at dawn, the air still thick with mist, gripping tightly the stone spear that once belonged to her father. She followed a narrow stream, her eyes scanning the soft ground for fresh tracks. Hours passed before she spotted a young antelope, alone and grazing near the tree line. She crouched low, belly to the earth, hiding behind shrubs and rocks. When the wind shifted and the animal lifted its head, she threw the spear. It struck deep into its shoulder. The creature stumbled and fled, blood marking its trail. Nara chased it, steady, focused, until it finally collapsed from exhaustion. She knelt beside it, placed her hand gently on its forehead in a silent farewell. With careful hands, she butchered the meat, wrapped the organs in its hide, and began the long walk home. That night, by the fire, her tribe looked at her differently, with the quiet respect reserved for a true hunter. To understand the lifespan of prehistoric people, we need only look to modern hunter-gatherer societies like the Hadza of Tanzania or the Kung of Botswana. These communities live without electricity, hospitals, or supermarkets, much like our ancestors did. A major study of 12 such groups revealed that 63% of children survived to age 15. Of those, 68% lived to at least 45, with many reaching their 60s or 70s. The most common age of death was around 72, and some lived to 78. Without modern medicine, they lived longer than many in industrial nations just a century ago. How? First, their lifestyle. Constant movement, diverse diets, and small, dispersed populations helped prevent the spread of infectious diseases. Unlike urban societies where viruses thrive, hunter-gatherers rarely faced epidemics. But it wasn't just biology, it was social structure. Their communities prioritized care. The elderly weren't abandoned. They were revered as storytellers, healers, and guides. Let's bring this to life with a story. Meet Nexau, an elder of the Kung people, whose name I read in an anthropologist's memoir. At 75, he could no longer hunt, but his knowledge of water sources saved his group during a drought. He remembered every spring in the Kalahari, learned over decades. His tribe didn't see him as a burden. They saw him as their GPS. This echoes what we see in the archaeological record. The elderly were living libraries, and their memory meant survival. It shows that longevity wasn't about physical strength. It was about social value. In our world, we often measure worth by productivity. Can you work, earn, contribute? But prehistoric societies valued wisdom, and the stories of elders could mean the difference between life and death. I wonder if we've lost something here. How often do we ignore our elders, assuming their knowledge is outdated? Perhaps our ancestors understood something we've forgotten. If so many lived long, why did some die young? Data from hunter-gatherer studies offers the answer. About 70% of deaths were caused by diseases like malaria or pneumonia. 20% were from accidents or violence, like falls or tribal conflict. And only 9% were due to old age. Most didn't die of aging. They died before they had the chance. But here's the key. In isolated groups, infectious disease is rare. Small mobile populations make it hard for viruses to spread. No measles, no smallpox, just nature's challenges. In 2019, I watched a documentary about the Sentinelese, an uncontacted tribe in the Andaman Islands. They've resisted outsiders for centuries. And you know what? They show no signs of modern disease. But when outsiders accidentally brought measles to other tribes, entire communities were wiped out. That tells me this. Prehistoric humans living in small bands likely faced fewer diseases than we think. Their greatest threats weren't plagues. They were injuries or parasites. This reveals a paradox. We think prehistoric life was dangerous, but urban life introduced new risks. Crowded conditions, sanitation issues, and trade routes all fueled the spread of disease. Our ancestors' mobility was their shield. And it makes me question our modern obsession with stability. Are we trading resilience for convenience? Something worth thinking about. The elderly were not just survivors. They were the backbone of prehistoric societies. Without books or Google, they were the internet, storing knowledge of seasons, herbs, and survival tactics. Among the Inuit, elders read animal fur to predict weather and guide hunting trips. In the Amazon, Shuar elders knew which plants could heal wounds and passed on rituals no textbook could ever teach. In Australia, Yolngu elders resolved conflict. Their wisdom prevented wars before they could begin. Let me share a personal story. My grandmother, at age 85, once told me how her village survived a flood in the 1950s. She remembered which hills stayed dry and led her family to safety. That's the kind of knowledge elders carry, real, life-saving, irreplaceable. And I see the same in prehistoric elders. They were not burdens, they were pillars. This deep reverence for the elderly reveals a social contract we may have forgotten. Prehistoric groups invested in their elders because they knew survival depended on memory. Today, we outsource knowledge to AI or Wikipedia. But what do we lose when we push aside lived human experience? I believe our ancestors understood something profound. A community without elders is a ship with no compass. Of course, not every elder could be kept. In times of famine or harsh winters, some made a different choice. Among the Inuit, elders would sometimes walk into the snow, giving their food to the young. In tribes across Africa and Australia, elders would stop eating during droughts, wandering away to die. This was not abandonment. It was sacrifice. Picture a grandmother in a prehistoric Arctic camp. The food is gone. The children are starving. And she knows her presence means one less meal for them. At dawn, she quietly leaves, her heart heavy but resolute. Her choice gives her grandchildren a chance to live. It's tragic, but it's also heroic. And I'm humbled by that kind of selflessness. Could I make that choice? Could you? Voluntary death is not cruelty. It is love in its purest form. It reminds me of soldiers who throw themselves onto grenades to save their comrades. These elders did not die in vain. They bought time for the next generation. Their legacy is our existence. The thread that ties all these stories together is compassion. From the toothless Homo erectus to the disabled Neanderthal, prehistoric humans cared for those who could no longer contribute. Why? Not for profit or gain, but because it was simply who we were. I believe this is what truly defines humanity. Not fire, not tools, but the instinct to protect the vulnerable. I volunteer at a local nursing home, and I see echoes of this ancient care. An 80-year-old woman, bedridden, lights up when her family visits. Her stories, seemingly mundane to some, keep her tethered to the world. Our ancestors knew this. Value isn't tied to usefulness. They fed the weak, carried the old, and buried their dead with care. It wasn't just survival, it was love. In a world obsessed with efficiency, we risk forgetting that. We measure people by output, not by heart. But our ancestors, armed only with stone tools, chose compassion over convenience. If they could, why can't we? We began with a myth that prehistoric people died young. But the truth is far richer. Many lived long lives, cared for by communities that valued wisdom over brute strength. From the old man of Dmanisi to modern hunter-gatherers, our ancestors proved that longevity and compassion are human instincts, not modern inventions. They faced death daily, and still chose to carry the elderly, share food, and honor their dead. Snow blankets the tundra in thick, silent layers. There are no gravestones here, no monuments, only wind, rock, and memory. And yet something remains. It lives in the shape of the land, the curve of fading footprints slowly swallowed by ice, and in the ancient patterns, unwritten, of those who once walked into the snow. Sarah had lived through 62 winters. In a world where few survived past 30, she became a living archive. Her face bore the scars of time. Her fingers twisted from years of work. Her body, hunched and fragile, still held the strength of presence. Her teeth had long since worn down to the gums, but her mind was sharper than any spear. She had witnessed mammoth migrations, the rising and falling of rivers, and the loss of those she loved. Brothers taken by fever, a daughter in childbirth, a husband lost to a cruel winter. Her memory carried the weight of generations, not recollection, preservation. Now she lived in a low shelter built into a hillside, sharing breath and warmth with the last members of her family. Her daughter Myra, Myra's 2 children, and a young hunter named Jono, still weak from a failed hunt. The food was gone. Only a bag of moss and dried bark remained. There had been no meat in days. The children had started coughing. Their bellies, once round with strength, were shrinking. Sarah watched silently. Her body could no longer fetch water. Her hands could no longer skin hides. She was an extra mouth. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire had burned down to glowing embers, carefully banked to last the night. In the dark, Myra clutched her children as they slept, unaware of what dawn might bring. Sarah woke in the night. Her movements were slow, but deliberate. She gathered her furs, thick and worn soft by time, and took nothing else. Her fingers brushed the wooden comb that had followed her through decades of life. Its smooth surface bore the fingerprints of survival. She left it behind. The snow greeted her like an old friend. Cold seeped beneath her furs, but she didn't shiver. Her body understood this final journey. Each step was careful, intentional. Behind her, her footprints vanished beneath the drifting wind. She walked into the dark. No light, no tools, no farewell. Hours passed. The sky lightened slightly, shifting from deep black to pale gray. The land opened into a basin between 2 ridges, a place she remembered. Not from this season, but from a life before. It had once sheltered her during a storm, and she had once buried her loved ones in its frozen earth.